Hey everybody, it's Todd. I just wanted to let you know this is, as you hopefully know by the title, the first part of a two-part series, Marshall 101. We just talked so dang much we had to break it up into two episodes so that you might actually listen to all of it. Anyways, this is the first part. You can catch the second part when it drops. And I encourage you to listen to that as well because it's going to be equally or mostly equally as awesome. Anyways, take it away.
Hey, welcome to Guitar Knobs, the guitars, gear, noise, and nonsense podcast, hosted today by these knobs.
Tony Dudzik, Pick Guardian.
Jared Brandon, and I'm here with the crew in Columbus this time.
All right. Hey, everybody, it's me, Todd, Novak. Welcome to the Guitar Nuts Podcast. We are thrilled to death that you are joining 5 of us tonight.
5.
Jared was a surprise guest on top of our surprise guest and other guest. So, Jared, thank you for coming down. It's awesome to see you, and we miss you.
I love it.
Yep. Hey, who else is here?
Well, I was just about to get to that, Tony. Thank you so much for prompting me.
Yes.
We have the ever olive drab.
What you got?
That's like the best.
This is olive drab.
If anybody could pick out a color for Rob, it'd be that color.
I love it.
Wow.
That's the most Rob color, right?
That's kind of mean.
You're so sweet.
We're starting off very mean.
You're so drab.
No, it's not that it's drab. It's just
You
it's
said
olive.
drab.
Well, that's what it's called, olive drab. Am I right? You're Army.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that color.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Jared.
I like it.
Anyways, we got Rob Chafe sitting
Hello.
sitting in the seat, and our new guest,
Chris Connor, happy to be here.
Chris
Hey.
Connor,
Chris Connor.
a local player and gear nut
Legend.
and an enthusiast about something very particular. Because what is this today, gentlemen?
Marshall 101.
Yes, Marshall 101. And I said, Rob and Tony, we're gonna hook this up. And Rob said, you should bring Chris on because he's kind of a Marshall nut and knows a lot about it.
Yep.
So,
Yeah,
hey,
man.
that's good because
I'm
that means I'm gonna learn something tonight.
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
excited.
And Jared is in town
For football
for
and stuff.
football
And family.
and football. Okay, so anyhow, let's get on with this amazing. Now, guys, maybe those people out there are like, what the heck's a 101? Tony, Jared, you care to elaborate?
It's when we learn stuff.
Okay.
That's right. That's what I would say. So we deep dive into, we basically deep dive because a 101 is basic.
Yes. And to clarify, everybody raise your hands if you're an expert on any of the things that we talk about besides a general, like, amps.
Oh,
Okay, so when we're talking about who's an expert at Marshall,
of anybody here, I'd say.
okay,
Who has
pretty
the most
much
knowledge? But
we're not like
Yeah.
what is an expert at that?
I guess
So
Jim
all
Marshall
we're
would be the
doing-
only one that would be an expert in Marshall.
That's a great
Yes.
point.
He's not remembering much.
Yeah,
right
I
Right.
tried to get a hold of him, but it didn't,
Yeah.
So what we do is, we're trying to give as much knowledge as we can produce and
Yes,
ask
yes.
questions of ourselves. We are not the authorities on anything we talk about, especially 101s. But we're here to learn and to share and to gain as much knowledge as we can, because Tony does have an encyclopedic knowledge of guitars, even though his brain is really small. It's all jammed in there. His head's big.
My
So
middle
what
name is
else up there?
Britannica.
Yeah. And then Rob is a full-time amp tech for how many years?
30.
a lot
50
of years.
50 years.
I technically have been doing it professionally for 27 years. Holy
Okay,
crap.
so
Holy moly.
if there is such a thing as an amp professional expert,
Eh.
it's you. No,
Okay.
don't brush that
Okay.
off. Just
All
own
right.
it. It's
All right.
true.
All right.
And Jared has had a bunch of
He's had so many
Marshalls.
Marshalls.
Chris has
Yes,
had loads of Marshalls. I have had one. So this should be really fun.
One.
One.
Marshall.
He still has one.
I still has one.
He has one.
Anyways, we are going to have a great time tonight talking about Marshalls and learning all about the beloved amp. So, first things first, we got a couple of announcements. I wanted to bring up that, let's see here. Oh, yeah. One of the things was I'm working on a what's it called, a playlist for my daughter, because she said, Dad, I want you to make me a playlist because there's this thing called the Satanic Panic. And I was like, oh boy.
what?
So think about back to when we were growing up, okay?
Yeah.
And everybody was on Donahue and Sally Jesse Raphael and Geraldo and everybody. And it was, all the parents were paranoid about all like the metal music and everything. that
Kids
was
in
coming out.
Satan's service.
That's right. And so she wanted me to make her a playlist of that, because now it's just kind of funny.
Yeah.
So I started doing that, and it was really kind of fun going through the things. And so I put in, she said, make sure you put Judas Priest, because I don't know anything about them. I'm like, I got you. So the first two that I put in were The Ripper. That's my favorite. And Green Manalishi, which I know is a cover from, of all things,
Fleetwood Mac.
Fleetwood Mac.
Did you go?
Green
Did you go Unleashed in the East, or did you?
Oh
go,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I included the album version of both as well, because
Okay,
I think
cool.
it's worth hearing the difference. That went for a lot of things on that list. So there's a lot of duplicates, like Motorhead and all that great stuff. Anyways, I sent a message to Jeff Schroeder, who is is a Judas Priest fan, and we've talked about that in the past. I'm like, hey Jeff, I'm making this playlist for my daughter. If you were making this playlist, what would you include? And he said, Metal Gods. We could probably all chorus that, actually. Want to try it?
Sure.
1, 2, 3.
Metal
Gods. Ding, 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 ding. Okay. And then Electric Eye, which is great.
Yeah.
Turbo Lover, fantastic song. And Breaking the Law. I added Free Wheel Burnin', which I was talking with my daughter and a couple other people, actually. And Free Wheel Burnin' has a soft spot for me because when I was 15, I went into my friend Darren's house, R.I.P. He had this guitar next to him, but all I heard was this song Free Wheel Burnin', and it was just about, I was walking in right when he hits the double time like bridge, like verse, I can't. Oh my God, I lost my mind, and I was like, and there's a guitar leaning up against the bed, and I had a brand new skateboard, and we were really into skating, and I'm like, I'll trade you this skateboard for that guitar. And I never played guitar, and he's like, okay.
Wow.
And it was just like, it was like a bolt-on neck,
Still.
like Les Paul Sunburst. Who knows? I don't even remember what the thing was. And I mean, I heard that, and I'm like, well, okay, that's it. That's it. Now, that wasn't the first time I'd ever heard guitar, but that sealed the deal for me. I was like, okay, I got to know I got to have this. So that one is near and dear to my heart. But I was curious if you guys each have an additional song that you'd like to add to Judas Priest, to the Judas Priest portion of this Satanic Panic playlist. And also out there listening, what would your additions be? Send them to us. I'd love to add them to my daughter's playlist. And you can actually go find that playlist.
You're talking about just Priest for the.
Just for this one.
Okay,
yeah. Or else we'd be here all night.
So yeah, you could do Diamonds in Rust. I'm not sure how dark
Diamonds in
that
Rust,
is, but
yeah.
like Riding on the Wind. I think that's what it. Like, if that's kind of a good
The
one.
hook.
I've seen them, like that Us Festival show they play.
Yeah.
That's got all the great songs on it.
Yeah.
So I'd throw those two in there.
Yeah, I might get tarred and feathered here, but I've never been a big Judas Priest fan.
It's okay.
But the one song I always liked by them was Electric Eye.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Well, good. That's on the list, so that's a double
To
vote.
me, oh, is that already on the list?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's one that Jeff picked.
I'm going to get a new site. Tar for Rob.
It's hard for Rob, yes. Right next to
Ooh, hold on, let me
Rockstar
grab
Todd.
her real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
I never really considered the Priest to be a satanic
Well,
band.
none. I mean, look,
Well-
almost none of them were really very.
Yeah, I mean later on, some of them
Venom.
it was more
okay,
questionable lyrics. But
Yeah,
anyways,
but the big haul of this was
Yeah.
basically anything that sounded threatening. I mean, Twisted Sister,
Yeah.
for Pete's sakes, was
Yeah.
lumped in there.
Yeah.
So
no,
go ahead.
I would, the one that always gets me and still gets me is Head Out to the Highway. And, probably that's, I would guess, is their biggest hit. But there's just something about that song that just, when he does it, you can feel it coming up from the diaphragm.
Yeah.
He's trying to sell it. That's all he's trying
Yeah.
to do.
He's
just trying to sell the
fantastic.
song. Yeah.
Fantastic front man. Okay, Jared.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, when I was growing up, I had
Dust
to
in the
listen
Wind?
to-
Okay.
No, I listened to when I was growing up, and I found rock and roll.
Yeah.
And laugh at me all you want, but I mean, it was Bon Jovi, "Slippery When Wet" in like '86.
Okay.
How old are you?
I'm 45. I'm
Yeah.
gonna be 45 this year.
He's the young one, right?
I think so.
So
yeah, he is.
when I
So
was
that's-
like,
yeah, he's a little
Well,
bit.
you
when
just
I
gave a
was
lot
6
away
and-
on the show.
6
They all
and
think
7,
we're 22.
6 and 7 and 8
No.
years old, Bon Jovi hit it big. So it was
Yeah.
like just hairspray, looking like a girl.
Yeah,
kinda
you
thing,
missed
and it was
all the
just-
actual
All it was sex,
satanic
drugs, and
panic
rock and roll.
altogether.
It wasn't about Satan and all that kind
You
of
weren't
thing.
even
They didn't,
born.
They didn't sing about Satan. They sang about drugs and women. So
Yeah, but so did
Now-
all the other ones that were.
as far as like, and if I can go out of Judas Priest, I remember in high school there was like 9 Inch Nails, and there was 9 Inch Nails, and there was
Jared and
Who-
Tony
who
are
did
sharing a
the-
mic, by the way. So
who did the song Psalm 69? It was Skinny Puppy, or there was all sorts of really wicked stuff in the 90s that came out, but I wasn't into that. I was actually into Led Zeppelin in the 90s,
Yeah.
which is really weird. So.
But even though they were
I really don't have much to contribute to this. So.
They even lumped Zeppelin and even like AC/DC, Highway
yeah.
to Hell, and then there was
Yeah.
like Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast. They weren't necessarily
Yeah, I remember Iron
satanic to your
Maiden.
point.
it's just
but it had that dark sort of some of those.
some reporter coined that term and it stuck.
The one I remember from that time was the Ozzy song. That wasn't that like the big
Oh,
one,
yeah,
Suicide Solution.
Suicide Solution, yeah.
Wasn't that like
Oh,
the?
yeah.
Yeah, because somebody had actually killed himself.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
liked
that's the whole
Ozzy, so
thing,
therefore
yeah.
it's Ozzy's fault. Anyways,
Anyways.
this is all past history. We're gonna move
On
on
today's
to
Judas
real
Priest
stuff.
episode.
I just I thought that'd be kind of fun. So I honestly, ladies and gentlemen, I would love to hear. Just send me one pick.
Send one.
Okay. All right, let's move on to what's going on in our music world this week. We're going to blow through this as fast as we can because we've got a really
Okay.
big episode here.
Let's all do it at the same time then.
You-
Do
be
it backwards since it
Backwards
can be
same
satanic.
time. Oh jeez.
Satanic.
all right, Tony, go.
Yes. Well, this week I'm going to steal your thunder, Todd. Todd and I went up to Cleveland and met up with our buddy Hex Matos.
Yep.
And went to go see X
Yes.
at the House of Blues.
Yes.
It was an incredible show. I mean, for these guys and gal,
They're pushing 75 years
yeah,
old.
they're up there in
And
age.
you would not
and
know
they,
it.
And they rocked like they were in their
Absolutely.
20s.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because having seen them 30 years ago, or at least, and your mind kind of plays tricks with you. Like Exene all of a sudden started to look like she was in her 20s again to
Yeah.
me. And then John Doe, you could see him bouncing around a little bit, and it was like, oh yeah. But then your eyes say, oh no,
Yeah.
no, they're
But
old
they
and
s-
wrinkly.
They sounded great. Their voices sounded great and everything. They're hitting those harmonies like it was, 40 years ago.
Actually, I think Exene sounded better now than she did back in the day.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Good. That was a super fun one. And what was the highlight of that we got to do?
Oh, you can do the highlight.
No,
Yeah.
I'm doing other stuff. Go ahead.
So at the end of the show, I see Billy Zoom walking off to stage right.
Yeah.
And there's a steps that are coming down there, and I don't know if he was going out to meet someone or
he was
whatever.
going around to sign some autographs for some
okay.
people over on the far right.
So as he's coming down the steps, I see him, and
Yeah.
I just.
And I start slapping
I
Tony's.
bum
I want
rush
to make
him.
sure he sees him. I'm like, hey, he's coming.
So I shake his hand and I said, Billy, thank you for everything.
Yeah.
And he just went, eh.
Uh-huh. And then I
this guy away from
said
me.
almost the exact same thing. I rushed in there and I
But-
said, "Thank you for your music, Billy," and shook my hand and
Yeah.
gave me his diamond smile.
Yep.
And then motored on.
Yep.
It was cool.
That
'cause
was
we're
cool.
fans.
Yes,
real
we are.
true fans. All right, Jared, about yourself.
So Guns N' Roses came to Nashville, and I took my wife, and they've got some new songs,
Yeah.
and it was great because I grew up with Guns N' Roses when they became popular. I was a kid, and I latched onto that ride. And when they did a lot of songs that they didn't play on the radio that were on the albums at
That's
this
cool.
concert, I
Rocket
knew all
Queen.
the Rocket Queen, Estranged on Use Your
Yeah.
Illusion 2, like weird songs like that. I knew all the words, and I loved looking at people that were trying to do the words and they didn't know the song, and it made me feel special. I'm like, I'm a real fan. I know the words to every single song, except for Chinese Democracy. That and anything newer than that, I don't really.
Yeah.
However, I will comment. They did a Fall to Pieces. What's the band after Guns N' Roses that Slash and stuff?
Velvet Revolver.
Velvet
Oh, there you go.
Revolver.
Yep.
So Axl sang that,
Oh, that's cool.
and during the verses were fine and normal for his range, and he came in and just Axl Rose screamed that he did like a different version of the chorus with different notes, and he sang higher, and he just sounded so good. I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, I wonder what the chorus is going to sound like. And it was great. I couldn't believe that was like the highlight of the night, because I've heard him do all the other songs before in 2016. And they even had Steve Adler in 2016, which was cool, for 4 songs in Cincinnati. I was at that show. But anyway, all in all, I had a really great time. Slash Guitar Hero, many people's Guitar Hero. So that kind of like
Right on.
outshined anything else Guitar World.
Sounds
So
good.
that was
Sounds
it.
good. Chris, go ahead.
So I've just been lately running through, or at least trying to kind of recover some of the vinyl records I had when I was younger. So I've been just buying like 70s, late 60s, early 80s vinyl records. So I've been hitting all the stores in Columbus. You know, you got Used Kids, Spoonful, Elizabeth's Records, Lost Weekend.
Thunder.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Thunder,
RPM's down there too. I even could run into Half Price. Anyway, I finally found a pretty clean copy of Sticky Fingers, which
Oh,
the Rolling
nice.
Stones, which is not easy to do. I mean, I've looked at so many of those. People love that record.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if the vinyl was just not up to snuff. I know there was like an oil issue in the early 70s. I think that was like maybe 71.
Oh.
But you know, it was a super clean copy, so that's awesome. I found a Beatles White Album, very clean. There's a couple that I'm looking for clean copies of. The last one I'm trying to find is like a Volume 4 for Black Sabbath.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Change is the third song. And I think at parties, people were lifting the needle, you know, because after you've heard Changes, it's awesome. But if you're at a party and you throw on Volume 4, it gets to Changes, you're like, let's just get to
Yeah.
Supernaut.
Yeah.
So there's always a scratch on the copies that I found. There's always like a scratch right on Changes, you know, because I think people lift the needle there. That's the only
Yeah.
thing I can come up with.
What
So-
about
crazy.
the experience of looking for Are you enjoying the experience of going into the record stores?
Absolutely,
And searching?
yeah. I just like going to. I even run to guitar stores when I'm not even looking for a guitar. You know, just
Yeah.
checking out used pedals. I usually run into people too in the guitar store. Like I see Willie.
Yeah.
I see Willie Phoenix a lot.
He's
We were
always
like-
in
Yeah.
guitar stores.
We were on the same sort of wavelength as far as frequency. So there was like 3 times in a row where I ran into Willie, which is fun. So, yeah. But I do enjoy just running around and checking out what's going on. But yeah, so I think that's probably the highlight, at least of my. It's not a Guns show or an X show, but it was definitely.
That sounds super fun.
Yeah.
All right, Rob.
All right, my music week. It's actually from last week. Played a couple shows back to back, festival shows. Probably for about a year now, I've had a demon on my pedal board. Randomly, sometimes it's 3 songs in, sometimes it's song number 30.
You mean a metaphorical demon?
No,
or a
it may
demon?
be an actual demon at this
Okay.
point.
Okay.
So 3 songs in, 30 songs in, somewhere through the night, my pedal board, I'll step on something or move something, and my signal cuts out almost to nothing. And if I just stepped on a pedal, I step on it again like it's a switch. And sometimes it comes in, sometimes it doesn't. I step on something else, it comes back in. But it's the middle of the show, so I can't troubleshoot it. So then right after the show, I go home and I set up all my gear in the shop and can't get it to act up. It would be on for hours. I'll be shaking thing, hitting it with a rubber mallet. Can't get it to act up.
Huh.
I'm like, okay, well, whatever. Go to the next show. 8 songs in, cuts out. I'm like, son of a... Did it both the festival, last 2 festival shows. Or one was a festival, one was just an outdoor show on Buckeye Lake. And I've lost it. The only thing I can possibly think of, at least my music week, or I'm going to be doing this week actually, is that I got a bad batch of those triple pole, double throw foot switches, those 9-pole. Because I replace all of them. Like if one starts to go bad, I just replace them all because they're all around the same age. And I did that 2-ish years ago, and maybe I got a bad batch. Because when the last show I played on, I stepped on one pedal, and it definitely cut out when I stepped off on the pedal. Clicked it back on, it was fine. Clicked it off again, and it died again. I'm like, okay, that one's definitely bad. So I left that pedal alone. But then it did it when I stepped on another pedal. And I'm like, could it possibly be that I've got like a series of questionable foot switches?
Yeah.
Which would explain why I haven't been able to track it down because I've been all random stuff.
Yeah. Well, that does make sense though, because every once in a while you'll
Sure,
hear a
there's
story
some good
about
production,
like,
yeah.
oh, there was a run of Rats in '91 that all have this ship that goes wacko, or
Yeah.
I'm just making something up. I
No,
don't know
no,
if
no,
that's
it's the
actually
truth.
true, but
Yeah, that's production
I've heard
woes.
stuff that
But something I'm going to do, I think, rather than, because those 3-pole, double-pole foot switches are not cheap even at cost. They're, I don't know, $12, $14, something stupid like that. I think I'm going to switch to a relay-based soft switch. I'm actually going to pull that out, and I've a couple different companies around that make affordable little PCBs without the switch for like $10 to $15.
Yeah.
And I've got a box of 200 momentary switches sitting on the shelf.
Perfect.
Yeah, so
All right.
That's a nightmare. You're getting ready to go big on a solo, and you step on.
and you
the
step on
pedal.
that pedal, like my
And-
boost pedal,
Yeah.
and it dies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's been fun. So anyways,
Yuck.
so that'd be my music week. What about you, Todd?
Well, what did I write down here? Oh, yeah.
You went to a show this past week, didn't you?
We did, but in addition to that, I got the Darlington Flyer from Reeves. Reeves Electro got the
That's a very
the
blue
daughter
pedal.
board, the Darlington
do?
Flyer. Well, it is based on a fuzz face, with a fat and a narrow sort of thick and thin, for lack of better terms, heavy bottom end, tight, focused. That's on a toggle, and then you also have the Darlington Flyer. But let me show you this, because I got the clear backing on it.
Oh, man,
the
that's great.
plexi
Oh, my
backing.
goodness.
And it's his daughter built this, and she's doing great. I mean, it's a beautiful pedal. It's a beautiful build. It came with all the
Almost
stuff. I was
like
just so excited. We plugged it in
Yeah.
It looks good.
at Hex's house, and he ripped it up. So if you want to hear what that sounds like, you can go to the Instagram, the Guitar Knobs Instagram, and give it a listen.
Oh,
It's
cool.
pink inside.
It is pink inside. It's fantastic.
That's pretty cool.
All right, we need to. Speaking of this pedal, fortunately, Hex actually had some Tour Gear Designs patch cables.
Yes, he did.
To string this all up. Thank goodness, because we were on an extra long area where he needed a little bit of
It was
reach.
off the board.
It was off the board.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
It was off the rails.
It was off the rails.
Nice.
Anyways, as he knows, and as we all know here, Tour Gear Designs patch cables are the
well, maybe
ticket.
Chris doesn't know.
Chris, are you aware of Tour Gear Designs patch
no,
cables?
I'm listening.
Holy moly.
Yes.
Let me tell you something, son. Tour Gear Designs patch cables are the bee's knees.
They are.
When you get a pancake jack or
Mm-hmm.
like one of those big square jacks, you're like, this is a big crazy thing on back here, and you got 2 top mounts, and it's jammed in between the 9-volt, and you're like, yeah. The footprint of the actual input jack is the size of the input jack. I mean, it's super micro, and
The cable is flat.
They're flat. So when you bend them, you're not stressing them. They're made for that.
Okay.
And they come in S shape and C shape. So S shape, you can go from a top mount to a side mount, or vice versa.
Nice.
In lengths from 3 inches to 24 inches. Anyways, fantastic. And
I
if
could
you-
actually use that because I do have cables that are kind of like, they go up when they're not supposed to go down. To go around.
Exactly. Or if you got a zigzag on the board because you got to go across and you go, no, I got to make a connection to the other side
Yeah.
on the we should get the long cable, bada bing, bow bow. So
into it.
So, Chris, just for you and for anybody listening,
For everybody else.
if you go to Tour Gear Designs, check out load up your shopping cart,
Cool.
and you can go
Is
to
there
your
a discount?
checkout. Yes, there is.
Ooh.
If you go in the coupon code and write the guitar knobs, all lowercase, all
10%.
one word, you're going to save an extra 10%.
extra 10%.
10%.
Yes, I said 10%.
Right.
They're wicked affordable, for real. It's a great
I got a bunch of
deal. All right. Anyways, thank you to Tour Gear Designs for sponsoring our 4 on the Floor.
That's right.
Let me get a little bit of this.
That was a good one.
1, 2, 3. 4 on the floor.
All right, Chris Connor, give us your 4 on the Floor.
So I'd probably start with King of Tone Analog Man, kind of like an upgrade from the Blues Driver, which is what I used to use. It's kind of an amp in the box. If you show up at a show, there's a back line, especially like a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe or something like that. The King of Tone, it's got 3 levels of gain for each side, 2-foot switches. I'm sure you're familiar. But you get like this amp in a box if it's a clean if you're running into a clean amp. It's awesome. And then the right side, you can turn it into like a tube screamer, so you can boost for some sustain on your leads. Gets a lot of texture. It cleans up great on the volume knob. So just like a Marshall, it's kind of like if you want to use a Fender amp but get that Marshall sound. It's very versatile. Cleans up on the volume, so you got lots of levels of gain. And I'd say I'd start with that. I've had that for probably almost maybe 15 years.
15 years.
15 years, yeah. So I'd run with that, and then next one.
Next one.
Yeah, I just actually got a backup for that. The wait list is 5 years now, so they're pretty.
It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. It's insane.
I still say that guy is an absolute genius in that the fact he's not ramping up production, putting
No.
them all out
Yeah.
there. He's like, this is how many I'm going to build, and I know I have work for 5+ years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I got one
Genius.
in the drawer. I'm gonna hold on to it. The one I have that's been on my board's got little chips all over it. It's been with me, so it's pretty fun.
Nice.
To run into that, I'd get a fuzz face, or what I've been using is like a full tone octafuzz. Even the smaller octafuzzes that I think they discontinued because he's out of business, but even the smaller ones are great. It's for going into like the David Gilmour Big Muff fuzz face sustainy fuzz. You can boost into the King of Tone. Some fuzzes will drop out, and it's good with humbuckers. It's not like as good as a fuzz face in that. Like if you just use a fuzz face and you're not using anything else, you can clean up with your volume knob. You just boost right in the King of Tone. It gives those big violin-like sustains. It's got a nice crunchy fat like Mick Ronson fuzz tone. So if you're
Yeah.
looking for fuzz, keep the King of Tone on. Just step on the octafuzz, and it's not finicky with. It's actually got an octave switch too. I leave the octave off
nice.
for the fuzz sound.
Right.
Then every once in a while, if you want to go to the octave, you can. It's not finicky with the impedance issues like some people have with wah pedals. So
Yeah.
it's just tried and true. You can stick it on your board. It's good to go. You can find them pretty much anywhere. They're not that
Do you
expensive.
find that you? I know with some of those pedals, like I have his version of the fuzz face, the BC
140 something.
108.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever it
It's
is,
a BC. Yeah, it's a blue one. Anyways, and in order for me to get anywhere near Unity, like I had to absolutely, it was just full on. And I know that happens with some of the other pedals in his line. Did you have the same issue?
So not
here?
with that one, but I know what
Okay.
you're talking about. Because the fuzz faces can be like that depending on
Yeah.
how they're biased. Some aren't. Like I think the Hendrix fuzz, the one that they put out, that Dunlop puts out now, but like the big disc and some of
Yeah.
the small ones are
Well,
really
this
good.
This is the full tone one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was just saying like a lot of fuzz faces
Oh,
have that
yeah,
issue.
yeah.
But like
Yeah.
like if you're looking for a fuzz face to jump into boost into a pedal, I think that the newer production and even some of the older Dunlop fuzz faces actually have a lot of volume on tap. But the Octafuzz has plenty of volume on tap.
Got it. Okay, cool.
That probably changes too, depending on if you're running something active in front of it. It'll
Yeah.
work differently.
I
Like
mean,
if you already
just-
put a low.
Just
piece.
nothing. I just
Right,
when I
right,
got
right,
it, I
right.
was like going to go right
And it
into it,
drops.
and I was like,
Yeah, whereas
what
if
the-
you would have some sort of buffer in front of it, it would possibly solve that problem for you. So FYI, if you want to try that sometime.
Interesting.
Like you've always run that. What do you always run that you're always on pedal? you guys both talked about.
EP boost.
EP boost. Like if you would put that in front of it or something, you'd probably be like, oh crap, okay, now I don't
Okay.
have to crank it.
Interesting.
So anyways,
That
just
kind of goes
FYI.
against putting that as the first.
It'll work
your
differently.
line,
Yep.
yeah, but
And it will
anyway.
react different.
Okay, so how about number 3?
So number 3, I would probably go with delay, and I use carbon copies. It seems like they're just, you can get them anywhere.
Solid pedal.
Throw a carbon copy on. I think they're great. I use 2, but since we're doing 4 on the floor, I would just pick 1. I could roll with Octafuzz, King of Tone, and then get that carbon copy. I would roll with that. I think they're great.
What do
good.
you like best about it? Is it the tone or the?
I think I like that it's sort of darker on the back end. It's not for everyone, but you can have the mix pretty high, and it doesn't cloud your like when you're lead playing. Like sometimes I can't even I have it pretty high. I can't even tell that it's really on. But if you turn it off, you can tell that it was on. You know what I mean? So it's not like if I'm playing a lead and I'm hitting a flurry of notes, I'm not getting a really clear image back. So it's
Like since it's darker, kind of
it
ducks
stays
behind
out of the way,
playing.
so you get this
Yeah.
nice, expansive, dreamy sort of vibe.
That's a really good way to put it because I
yeah.
think a lot of people struggle with that. I know when I was setting up the HX Stomp to try to find a delay that I like, some of it I was just like, this. I'm going to sound like a moron if I'm doing
It
this.
overtakes
I mean,
everything,
I
yeah.
will anyways, but it does. It overtakes it, and then you just have this like collision of notes that are like,
Yeah.
yeah.
As with most things, a lot of times what you think, like, okay, that's the right amount. Less is more.
Yeah.
You know.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think just for vibe, if you're incorporating delay like maybe the Edge did, maybe you want a brighter delay because you want to hear those.
Yeah, that's pronounced.
right.
Yeah.
But I know he used a memory man, so I think it was a little bit, that was part of his style. Whereas I'm just looking for like some vibe, So
Yeah, just a little bit of movement. in the
yeah,
back.
that's right.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah,
With, I got the old Ibanez, the 80s Ibanez delay, the DL, the 89. Yeah.
is that a purple one?
Yeah, it's like
Eyelastic?
purpley
Oh,
pink.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's great, and it's like that. I'm like, that's exactly what I was trying to get for just an always on, just a little bit of lift and just that little extra nest, the air in the signal, because I do stuff that is pretty. It's punchy, and I need it to be like I need attack.
Yeah.
and I want that attack to be relatively articulate, but not overly precise.
Right.
And that does it beautifully.
Perfect.
Yeah. Anyway, number 4.
And then the number 4, the Line 6 MM4, because it
Which one's
has
that?
it's the modulation one. So it's got 4 foot switches. So you got one power supply you get 4 pedals in one, basically. You can get a Univibe out of it. Typically, I'll run
It's
Univibe.
like the DL9.
Right,
but
it's like you know how they have the green one,
Yeah.
the
Oh,
green
okay.
delay.
That's the
it got discontinued. I'm not
What
sure how
color
popular
was
it
it?
was. It's blue.
Yeah.
the
no,
MM4.
I remember when Corey and Lang.
Okay, yeah.
When they get
DD9.
those, in. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
So I use Univibe in there, a couple trems. If you're trying to get, depending on what you're playing, you can get like a really
DL4. I'm sorry.
yeah.
We're talking. There's
Yeah,
a lot of
DL4.
math going
Okay,
on.
yeah,
My
yeah,
bad.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the
But
MM4.
yeah,
okay.
you can get phasers. Typically, I use a couple trems, like a really pronounced trem, and then one that's subtle.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just let notes ring, and just kind of, if you're doing like a singer-songwriter thing, you can just get some nice trem going.
So is it 4 presets?
You can preset, so you dial in whichever one you want. You
Right.
can have 4 trems.
Right. 4
Different
of
speeds,
whatever.
yeah.
But
So
it
you-
also pages up and down, right?
No, you just got to pick 4.
No.
You pick your 4
Oh, okay,
things
got
for
it.
your gig. Typically, I run a Univibe, great with a fuzz, obviously, kind of that Hendrixy thing. The sounds are really good. You can find a Univibe that sounds better, but unless you're A-Bing, I mean, if you're live, it's actually, and I've used it on the recordings before, where it sounds really good. Maybe there's a better one, but if you don't compare it right at the moment to the better one,
Right.
it's perfect. So,
Yeah. If
so I
it's
dig
doing the
that.
thing for the song, then it's right.
Right, and it's got one power supply. That's the thing. You got like a pedal power. You got 8 outs, and then you got the. Sometimes I'll jump off of a TU2 to get 9. You can jump out of a TU2,
yeah.
and then I can plug maybe one pedal or maybe even the Line 6 into the back of the pedal power 2. So you can get basically
Accessory.
Yeah. So, but I think having 4 pedals for one is key on that.
And I can imagine I'm probably a little bit like you too. With I don't like to page up, page down. I just like to I hit this button and it turns on this sound. And that's,
Absolutely.
And so that being a little more old school kind of pedal where you don't have to page
Right.
and go through presets, you just label it with a little label maker. This is my,
That's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
Or you could have
did they reissue
Pete
that
Cornish
one?
do one for you.
I don't know if they have, but you can find them.
Because they reissued the DL4. I didn't know
Yeah.
if they reissued the rest of them in that series.
I
or not.
don't believe that is.
They
that
just
has
did the
happened. Just
delay.
a DL4, yeah.
Come on, Line 6.
Anyways, hey, that was really great.
Thanks,
Yeah,
man.
excellent.
We always
Yeah.
get new things and learn new things, and that's what this episode is about specifically.
Specifically,
So, with our remaining 10 minutes,
Yes.
we're going to go through.
Here we go. Speed.
Sorry, hey,
here's the history of Marshall. Starting in
guys, we like
Thank
to
you.
talk about all this stuff, and
Yeah.
hey, you have a week between episodes, so we can make this a 4-hour one, and I'd like to see somebody cry about that.
Yes.
All right. Anyways, we are going to learn all about the Marshall. amps. So, I guess let me first do this before we deep dive into things. I would love to know from each of you, like, what is it about Marshall that you like?
Yeah.
Okay, Chris, we'll start with you.
For me, Marshall.
Can I, first, I want to.
Oh my gosh!
Well,
Rob.
no. This will go back to this. And I think we should do this for Jared, too. What Marshalls do you currently own?
So I'm down to, I have 4. I have a 69 Plexi 100 watt super lead. I have a 69 50 watt bass, it's Plexi, 71 small box 50 watt, 1987.
Okay, 1970.
And then I'm a 1974. It's a 50 watt, it's a Mark II. So
Wow, okay. So you got 3 50 watts, 100 watt.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a bass 50, a lead 50, and 2 lead 50s then, basically.
correct.
2 lead 50s, a bass 50, and okay.
I've had 10 at one point because this was back in the day before, and I don't want to
Before they
derail.
went crazy?
Well, before you can, all these YouTube videos where you can hear what they sound like, I kind of needed to buy them. You won't walk into a music store in Columbus and see an old Plexi sitting around. So in order to hear one, you had to actually reach out and find one and buy
Right.
it. So
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought that was important.
No,
just
that's a
to
good-
kind of
fair play, Rob.
What he is,
Fair play.
because Marshall, like we're going to talk about, has changed so much over the years. That's where Chris is kind of centered
I
at
think
right
that's
now.
a great idea. And
Okay.
how about yourself?
I actually own no Marshalls.
Have you owned a Marshall?
Oh yeah, I've
Okay.
owned. I can't remember them all. I don't think I've had anything in
Name
the
your
60s,
favorite
though.
one that you had.
My favorite one I ever had. I think my buddy Justin still has it.
You should get that back.
No, because last time I talked to him, he wasn't interested in selling it. It was a Marshall that I actually bought from another buddy when I was like 20 years old. It went through a fire in a bar. And I bought the head and the 412. I'm going to get the year wrong. It was 78 or 79. It was a 50 watt 2204 circuit. But it had gone through a fire. Bought the head and the cabinet
Right.
together. I think I paid $400 or $500 for both
Wow.
of them. Yeah.
And by the way, so we are already throwing around a lot of math and a lot of inside
Yeah.
baseball. But the whole point of this, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're going to address all these things in a very layman's friendly term. So
gonna try.
if I can understand it, I think most everybody else should be able to.
So, anyways, that was probably my favorite.
Jared is
what do you got
dying
right
to
now?
tell us what he has.
I want to do show and tell.
Yeah.
I have a 1973 a JMP 100 watt Mark II super lead.
Yeah.
And at one point, somebody put a gain stage in it, which makes it very usable for somebody like me. So the collectability is gone, but the utility is still there, and it's very loud. I have a 77, 78-ish JMP with the master. It's got a master volume, and that is all stock. I also have a DSL 2000, a JCM 2000
DSL. Yeah.
DSL, and Rob has actually worked on it. And that's the one I would take out if I for gigs and stuff like that.
We're also going to cover all the acronyms.
So there you go.
Okay, great.
Cool. That's a
Tanya?
pretty good lineup.
Well, the only Marshall I currently own is
Is a Vox AC30?
is a Vox AC there. No.
Can I take a guess what it is?
Go ahead.
It's a little.
Have you got the 1974 combo?
No, it's a Class 5. So it's a little 5
Oh
watt.
yeah, okay, yeah, I remember those.
And it's a great amp. I mean,
forgot about those.
Yeah, and the reason that I bought that one is I was looking at I went into a small amp phase, and I was going to get another Vox, like an AC4 or something like that. And I got to look at where they were being made, and the Class 5 was made in the UK.
Really?
And it was the amp that really saved Marshall as we know it, because the people there were making these. Korg had been sending things overseas, but they still wanted to maintain some presence in the UK. And the factory in the UK, this was the first amp. Now, of course, they've subsequently started production again.
Yeah.
But this was the first amp that did that. Now, prior to that, I had a JCM 800 212 50-watt combo, which I can still get it if I need it. My friend Fritz has it now, but that was the best sounding amp I've
that's what I was
ever
going to say.
played through.
Of all the 800s I've had come through the shop, the 2204, so that's 50 watt,
Yeah.
2204, generally the either late 70s JMPs or the combos. Those 800 combos are my
Yep.
favorite. I don't know what it is about those.
Yeah. So that had, it's got 2 greenbacks in it, and I mean,
wow.
it just sounds perfect.
Cool.
Nice.
Todd, you got
Well,
something?
yes, I have the Origin 50, which is it's a 50-watt head. I also have the combo version of that, so that I just keep the combo, the 112 combo in my home, and I practice through that, writing and all that stuff. And then when I'm playing at our rehearsal space, I have the 50-watt head, the Origin 50-watt head, and a 212 vertical. And in that I got a mix of basically a creamback and a greenback, the versions of the Warehouse speakers, the ET65 and the not the Veteran, Crumb. I forget the name of it. But anyways,
Yep.
And that one is, for whatever reason, I have never really been into the Marshall sound as I thought, because I associated it with a lot of other things, and almost every club I've ever been into, if somebody's playing it, I'm just like, what? It doesn't sound like what the records in my head sound like. And so I've just kind of avoided them and wanted to find my own sound, and then lo and behold, it's a Marshall. So
Awesome.
And this is important. Probably what you've always heard, like, okay, whatever, the Joe Perry, this is a Marshall sound. Why can't I get out of this?
yeah.
Well, the first thing is you have to put it in a room that's about half a mile away from you. I mean, because
That's fair. And
those
crank it.
sounds
And
are
crank it.
yeah, and then hit it with the treble booster or something else in
Yeah.
front. So it's like, so if you're going to play at any moderate sized stage as a local
Right.
original band, can't do it.
Right.
Just
So
can't
so
do
that
it,
so
you know?
that actually goes to the next question, which is the good and the bad of what we deem to be,
Yeah.
about Marshall. I think
Well-
it's worth touching on that, and then we're going to get into the good details.
Well, I think it's kind of neat too. Like, Chris is obviously into more of the non-master volume stuff, where
Right.
Jared said, he's got 3. He's got one from each separate kind of era. He's
Yeah.
even though your JMP, its master volume is late 70s, it's the same as an 800 basically. So he's really got something from the non-master volume, the single channel master volume 800s, and he's got the next one, the DSL. So 3 progressively different eras. But he said if he was doing a cover gig, he'd take out a DSL. I'd agree with that,
Yeah.
because you can get it at a relative volume. So
Yeah.
it's neat that
Yeah.
depending on what you want to
honestly,
use it
I think
for.
a lot of people, at least that I've been around, and a lot of punk bands and stuff, I don't know if they just don't know how to EQ it right, or their pedals are colliding with what the amp's trying to do, and the volume's on like 2 because they've got a DSL 2000, and then there's a
Yeah, I think Marshall is tricky in some sense. You can get them so they're not, they're like modded or they don't sound that good. Especially the older ones. I've heard some that didn't sound as good, but when you get them to a tech, and like Rob, of course, then to me they're just magnificent. It's an experience, really. I never took them out to the gigs as much. They are big, They are pretty loud. I have a Fry-Up power station. It's a great power soak, so that's why I can actually use my 100 now. I had a couple other 100s I sold because the 50s you could at least get them into, if you have them at home or somewhere, you can. They're not that much quieter, but it was a little more reasonable. 100's pretty, even that extra 3 dB, it can be pretty loud. And I was using hot plates.
Yeah.
The hot plates are step down, whereas the Fry-Up power station's got a volume knob.
We'll get it. Yeah. Let's get into what you're talking about right now, like attenuation and all that stuff.
When we hit
a little
that
bit,
stuff.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
What about a quick? You want to start with quick history of Marshall from Tony?
Yeah. So wait. Let's just. So what do we like? Everybody say at one what they like about the Marshall. On 3, ready? 1, 2, 3. The sound.
Tone? Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
I mean-
just to be 100% clear. Okay. Tony.
Yes.
Take it away, baby.
All righty. So let's start with a brief.
No, I mean get out.
Oh.
No, I'm just. No, go ahead.
You always
go
kick
ahead.
me out at the good parts. Let's start with a brief history of the man behind the company, Jim Marshall. Yes, I actually have. I was going to bring my 3 NAMM T-shirts that he signed for me, but
You have a picture of him in your shop.
I do have a picture of him, me shaking Jim Marshall's hand.
Yes.
So, Jim Marshall was born in 1923, not 2023, 100 years ago. Wow. And as a child, he suffered from this. I never heard of this before I started reading this, but tuberculosis of the bones.
Jeez.
And he spent most of his school years in basically.
Well, that's how the kids get rickets, wasn't it? Is that how rickets were?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure that's.
But
how
anyhow, he spent most of his childhood in a cast from his armpits down to his ankles, and he spent a lot of years trying to overcome, both muscular and bone degeneration. And in fact, he became a tap dancer. That his dad thought that would help him. Help with that. So the problem was in this. It comes World War II. He failed his physical for the armed forces, and so instead he studied engineering on his own, which is interesting. And then he worked as a tool maker during the war and after the war. After the war, he started drumming and became a full-time drummer in 1946. Actually, he probably drummed before that, but that was his, official.
It's like Dr. Z.
Like Dr. Z and Leo Fender. No, was Leo?
No,
Leo
wasn't a
was
drummer.
not. He was not a drummer.
He was just a nothing.
Yeah.
He was a man with a
He's a
screwdriver.
technician.
Yeah.
Wrote his name on a styrofoam.
I bet he could play some mean drums. Maybe congas. I think he was a conga player. Anyhow, he started teaching drums, and he trained a lot of up-and-coming drummers of the time. Mitch Mitchell was it Mitch Mitchell? Jimi Hendrix's drummer?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And he saved up enough money in the 50s to open up his own drum shop in a West London store. And a quick aside, I dragged our hosts when we were in London to that. It's pretty far out there. It's about as far west in London as you can get. I just wanted to go there. And there's a little placard there that said, Jim Marshall sold his first amp in this location.
Huh.
That's kind of cool.
It's now a dry cleaner or something like that. Anyhow, he started building bass and PA cabinets around 1960. Not guitar stuff, because I guess there were other amps out there. Bass players were always complaining that they couldn't be heard, so he was using 12, 15, and 18-inch speakers in his cabinets. When drummer, and also obviously had a drum shop, when the drummers and bass players came in with their guitar players, they wanted to know why he didn't offer guitars and amps. So he said, I think I'll start offering guitars and amps. And he was smart about it, because at the time, Gibsons and Fenders were kind of difficult to get in the UK.
Wasn't Pete Townsend the guy that actually is the one that did that? Because he was hanging around in Jim Marshall's shop for ages and ages.
Yeah, apparently Jim knew Pete from a very young age.
Yeah.
And he was hanging in the shop.
So we may not even have the Marshall amp if it weren't for Pete Townsend.
Certainly not the 8x12 cabinets.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of the things, because as music got louder, and especially in the 1960s, they wanted bigger and bigger amps, both for bass and guitar, keyboards, sometimes the accordion.
Never the accordion.
How much of that do we think that is also a result of shows maybe starting to be bigger? Because
100%.
traditionally, like those rock shows,
yeah.
because rock was still like not really a
Well,
thing
yeah.
yet.
I mean, when you think about the Beatles when they toured, I mean, Vox made them special 50 watt and 100 watt and 200 watt eventually for bass, and they still couldn't hear anything.
Imagine standing in front of a 200 watt amp and playing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Well,
it would
how
probably make
loud
your
was
knees
the-
buckle.
Actually, I can. While we're on the Marshall thing, there's a 200 watt Marshall amp, and I've stood in front of it and played it.
Jeez.
I immediately fried a vintage 30
Ah.
and a 412. One of them just like that went zip, and I was like, okay, turn it down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyways, back to Tony.
All right. So in 1962, a gentleman by the name of Ken Brand came on board as the service engineer. And at the time, he suggested, I guess, to Jim that, why are we importing all this stuff? We can just make our own.
Yeah,
Well,
what
let's
they
make
were-
our own amps.
What they were doing up until that point, they were buying other people's pre-made amps, basically,
Yeah.
and selling them. So they weren't like branded, but they were like kitty kind of things that they were buying. They were pre-assembled and then mating them with their amps.
Okay.
And I think it was Ken that first went to Jim and said, why are we buying this generic thing? I can make this if we source the parts.
Yeah.
And he had two other friends that were in, I think, a ham radio group with him.
I think that's right.
That's how they
Like
all
a
knew
comedy
each other.
routine?
Yeah.
Oh.
yes.
Thanks, Todd. But yeah, they were all engineers, and they were all part of an amateur ham radio group locally. And so he pulled them in to help him.
Nerds.
And that would be two
Great.
gentlemen by the two gentlemen called Dudley Craven and Ken Underwood. Is that correct?
Yep. And Dudley ended up working for Marshall also. He came on board as a actual employee. I don't think Ken Underwood ever did.
No.
But those three are actually the ones responsible for
And let's not forget Jim's son Terry.
Terry. Terry was working there too.
Because he was like it was like a father and son music store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So yeah.
All right.
we'll talk
after the
about
suggestion,
We all
they
learned a bit
started
about
making
that.
some things. As they say, the rest is history.
There you
So
go.
what was the first Marshall?
The first Marshall, the JTM45.
And at first it didn't have a name at all.
It was just
the
amp.
Marshall.
It was just the amp.
Yeah.
By the way, this is the point that we're going to kind of go through almost all, well, maybe, I guess all, the major milestones.
Yeah.
in
we're
the-
not going to talk about.
There's way too many
Oh,
other.
I mean,
there's a
what
million
we
different-
cover here is just kind of scratching the
It's
surface.
so that
but
you can
it's-
walk around and have a conversation. Yeah.
Okay. So the JTM45
So that's the first one.
started off life as a head.
Yes.
Many people recognize it from later versions, but let's talk a little bit about that.
Where did it come from?
It came
Where did it come from?
from Ken Brand.
Well, it really came exactly.
Well, it started off, let's just say Marshall owes a lot to Fender,
Yeah.
specifically the bassman.
And I've seen stuff like on different pages and different forums, and people say, "Well, it's very much like a Bassman, or it's had this change or that change." The circuit, as far as the capacitors, where they're wires from A to B, the resistor values from A to B are identical to a 5 or a 5F6A, which
Yes.
is the
and this is coming from
1959
the
Bassman.
actual amp expert.
Yeah. If
Yes.
you open up a first run JTM 45 and a Bassman of that era, they are identical. Now, of course, the transformers are going to be spec'd a little different,
Right.
because you're halfway around the world or a quarter of the way around. It's so they're
preamp
gonna be,
tube maybe.
see what
Was there a preamp tube difference? 12AX7
there
versus
was actually.
12AX7?
You're right. I don't know on
Holy
the very
cow,
first
look at
ones
this
or
guy.
not. I don't know if it was the very first ones
Okay.
or shortly thereafter. Yeah, they used the 12AX7 rather than a 12AY7.
That might be right.
CC
think it's
comes in with
AY7.
a left hook.
which basically means that the AX7 has a higher gain factor to it. So yeah. I think
Gain factor
you're
meaning you're
If
gonna
it wasn't
have
the very
more
first
gain?
ones, yeah,
Okay.
and it's going to be not so much louder. It'll just break up much sooner and be raunchier.
Okay.
With a 12AX7 in it.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that
So-
was the really
Yeah, and the basement's already aggressive, pretty aggressive amp.
Yeah,
You crank
it's
it.
because it's a tweet. It's not the later tamed down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
So these amps, of course, they started off with either 6L6s or 5881s, as they're called in the UK. And
Those are the tubes, everybody.
the power tubes.
Remember, we gotta
the
talk.
power tubes, a pair of them. You got
Yes.
a pair of them in there. And later versions, they even beefed them up to KT66s, which are a little higher output, a physically bigger tube.
Physically bigger.
And also at this early stage, the GZ34 rectifier tube.
Yeah, which is important because after a little while here, they phase out the GZ34, probably for reliability and cost and all that stuff.
Right.
But it drastically changed the amps
Okay,
after that.
so I'm going to be man on the street.
Okay.
I have a couple questions. First of all, tell us what JTM stands for.
JTM comes from Jim and Terry Marshall.
There you
JTM.
go. Now we all know. And the 45 is for the 40 watts.
45 watts.
Now,
Conservatively.
when you just said,
Roughly-ish.
I just want you to do as brief as you can. I know that we tried to do this before, and you gave me the
know.
face.
It's tough.
In one of the other episodes that we've done, the difference between when we're saying the power amps and the rectifiers, can you just give a super?
Yeah, the rectifier tube, the job of rectifier tube is to change the AC voltage to DC, which everything else in the amp runs on DC voltage. That's a rectifier tube. That's its only job. Switch
Okay.
AC to DC. An output tube, I don't like calling them power tubes because they're
Okay.
not power tubes. It's kind of confusing there. An output tube, it's typically used in an output section of an amp, is the last stage that amplifies the signal. It actually changes it
The
to a high
signal
current.
that the rectifier has helped create.
No, that the whole preamp stage. So
sorry.
the rectifier
Yeah.
tube changes AC to DC volts.
Right.
That sends out to the preamp and the output section so they
Right.
can work.
Right.
Preamp is all your manipulation, get it from a very low signal to a higher signal with your EQ and everything. Then it goes to the output stage, your 6L6 or KT66, to pump up the current so it can drive a speaker.
Right.
Now, the big deal here, talking about the rectifier tube, is
Rectifier!
yes, that would be
Cornelio?
it. with a tube rectifier versus a solid state rectifier. Let's just say you're playing and you hit a chord really hard with a tube rectifier. It actually causes the tube to go what, and you get this
I like that.
sag.
Yeah.
Versus a solid state pretty much follows the voltage, no matter how hard you hit it or whatever. But there's just a certain amount of sag that comes from tube rectifiers.
The tube rectifier has a resistance, and as you pull more current through it, it pulls the voltage down.
Right.
That's what happens with that.
So it kind of browns the amp out, as we
the
say.
The whole voltage of the amp will sag for a moment, depending on how hard you hit it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's probably why some of the times if you hear a solid state amp, it doesn't. It might sound almost, for lack of better terms, clinical.
It could, if you had two amps sitting next to it. Let's say you had a vintage JTM 45 and
Yeah.
you put a tube rectifier on one and put a solid state rectifier on the other. The tube rectifier will sound like it responds more to your playing, because it does. As you hit harder, the voltages change, and it will brown out a little more, where the solid state will be more punchy, more in your face,
Okay.
maybe more clinical sounding.
Okay. And explain brown out, because these are terms that we need to set right now
Okay.
as we go through brown out.
Brown out, think Eddie Van Halen with a Variac.
Okay.
Running lower voltage into an amp. Think of the sound if you have a tube amplifier and when you're playing, and if you turn the power switch off, that sound as it starts to, the volume goes down and down
Yeah.
about 50%. It's dropping your voltage about that much. So it really starts to grit and grind and spit at you.
And that is what we take as like the overdrive. The sound of that, like an overdriven sound.
It's a different type of overdrive. Yes, you're right. It clips sooner, but
I'm just talking about the end result.
well, but it's more than just overdrive. It's if you take an amp with a tube rectifier and crank
It's like
it up
a
and hit
fry,
real
a little
hard,
bit of fry to it.
Well, yeah, but you also notice that you hit the note, and for a split second it's loud, then it's quiet, then it comes back up. It's a whole dynamic change, and as it happens, it's not the same signal that drops and then comes back up.
Right.
As it goes down, it breaks up differently.
Yeah.
And then it comes. So it's
Okay.
this.
I'm just trying to. I'm
It's
trying
a
to
tough-
paint. I'm playing like
Yeah,
I don't.
right.
I'm playing. I
and
don't
this
know
is one
it,
of the
and
tough
I'm-
things about
Yeah.
like these kinds of amps and old Marshall, like we started to talk about, is that until you sit in front of one and turn it up and hit that chord, and you talk about all these terms, but then when you hit that chord the first time, you're like,
Oh. Yeah. Yeah.
that's what that is. Okay.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so it's hard. I understand what you're trying to do, but yeah, it's really
right.
hard to describe
Okay. Well,
that. Yeah.
I'm trying. Everybody out there. So
You're
that-
working at it.
You know,
So, mind your sag.
mind
So
your
yeah,
sag.
so the JTM 45, it's a Bassman with a 12AX7 in the front end. It has tube rectifier.
Yep.
What else do we need to know about?
I want to know what do you think the difference in the street cost between an OG Bassman versus an OG JTM 45?
Chris?
I think they're. I'm not sure. I'd have to look. I don't shop. I don't shop for those because they're a little out of my price range. But I would maybe the Bassman would be more. You think?
I don't know.
Those old Bassmans are.
I don't know.
And I guess it would. Well, you know, I bet you one of the
I'll
very
find out.
first series JTM 45s, like from 62.
Okay,
63,
yeah, the
that
first,
would have
of
to
course,
be
that like the white ones. The one was the white with the white grill.
because the 5F6A, which is the 59 Bassman, they made from the
Okay.
first one to the last one, they were all the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where like the JTM 45, they kind of went through change, so the first ones would be made differently.
Right.
and-
No, I agree.
So probably, I guess an actual 45, early 45 would probably
golly.
be loud. What
Yeah,
are we
I'd be-
looking at?
I'm curious.
Well, I just saw one that says Marshall JTM 45 Mark II, $12,000.
Okay, so I think a Bassman might be around 10, don't you think? A 59 Bassman?
Yeah, 59. It could
So
be.
they're-
I mean, they're probably about the same. I would think that the Marshalls would be a little bit higher.
Wow.
Which you got?
Jared has to go pee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those are two Holy Grail type amps. So they're
Yeah.
they're
Yeah,
it's
I'm
not
just, I'm just checking to
it's,
see.
it's not
Yeah.
like
Todd's
like
always
for,
worried about what they cost.
for instance like a Sunburst
Yes.
Les Paul 59 versus even like a 59 Strat. I think the Les Paul is going to be
Yeah.
Considerably higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
For a good reason, by the
so-
way.
you know
So-
one good
like Stratocasters.
okay.
Yeah, this is an ongoing
One
thing with
good,
them.
and we're probably going to get to this. One good, like 1965, was that JTM 45 in a combo was Eric Clapton's The Blues
Right,
Breaker
yeah.
album.
That's the next thing on the list.
Stepping out. If you want to go listen to like one of those amps, sounds like it's on 10, and I think it blew people's minds because it was a Les Paul through a JTM 45 Blues Breaker combo.
Yep.
And you can tell it's different. It's really aggressive, really loud. It's just got a ton of sustain. It's
Well,
really,
we're going to talk about that because there is a huge difference in the reissue versus the original Blues Breaker. But before we get there, the one thing I thought was really cool about the JTM 45, and this led to, so I think originally Jim made a 4x12 cabinet, and it was like a standard box, right? And he did not like the look of the head sitting on this big box. And it led him to develop the slanted
Slant
cab so that the head is the same depth as that top of the slant.
Really?
And that is, I mean, that to me is an iconic.
It is, but it's
412.
also, if you're playing, it's super helpful.
Well, yeah.
If you're playing in front of it, because now you have something not directed at your butt, but you got something,
Yeah.
shooting up at your,
So-
head.
sure.
So I think that 4x12 cabinet with the slant is, I mean, it also helped define the sound of Marshall.
Yeah.
And for as you said, from a player standpoint, having two speakers shooting up towards you a little bit more than straight out at your knees
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Good thinking there, Mr. Marshall.
Hey, real quick before we go on to the next model here, I just want to back up just really quick. We talked about the Dudley, Ken and Ken, being the
Yes.
guys that built the amps and everything.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Jim's participation in that. So he wasn't actually building the amps, even the early 45s,
I don't think so. No.
but he was the guy who really quickly, like, they built, I don't know what it was, 10 or 20 of these amps out of Dudley's shed from what the lore is. And then they brought them to Jim, and Jim would mate them with a cabinet and put the Marshall branding on it. Very early on in that process, Jim said, okay, we're selling these really quick. let me bring everything in-house. Let me rent this extra space down here. I'm going to hire you guys. So he saw like the bigger picture, like, hey, there's some money to be made here.
Yeah.
And he knew all the musicians really well.
So rather than be a middleman between an amp builder and then him, he was like, no, I can brand this as my amp, make it into a Marshall and,
And I'm going to put them in the hands of all the guys that are coming in.
I think from what little I know, that was Jim's role, and then a lot of Terry's role, his son as well, is making it a company rather than being concerned about the electronic stuff.
Yeah, and I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I mean, when we were talking about Voxes, there was a similar dynamic.
Right.
But anyhow.
Sorry,
all right.
Sorry, continue, Tony.
The famous Blues Breaker.
This is the famous Blues Breaker. So it's the next model. It's essentially a JTM 45 combo.
64 to 72. 1964 to
1964 to 1972.
Okay.
And again, they made a combo in either by a 4x10 or a 2x12, similar to what Fender was doing, but they also added tremolo on the Blues Breaker.
Quick question, 4x10 versus the 2x12. Is there a consensus on what the sound of the Blues Breaker really...
212.
212? Okay.
Well, what about the breakup thing? What breaks up more?
Between those two, I wouldn't say it's a breakup difference. Probably a EQ tone difference.
It may be like which guitar you're playing. Maybe certain guitar players pick the 410 because it gelled with their signal chain more, I guess, depending on what...
If memory serves me right, one was marketed as a lead option and one was marketed as something else. I can't remember what it was. They actually had different model numbers for those. Like one was a JTM 45 / something.
Yeah.
And so there was a purpose that they marketed and designed the two of them. I don't know if like guitar players actually stuck with it or.
Yeah, I would agree though that the 2x12 is.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's the one.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I've never seen a 410 in person. Has anyone else?
Nope.
Yeah.
I just read about
Well, there we go.
So that we cannot necessarily confirm that, although it is in the book.
They didn't reissue a
Anybody
410.
has one, just
No, that's a good point. They didn't reissue
loop it in the
You just go ahead and send it to us, care of.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I guess towards the end of the run, now did some of these have KT88s in them as well?
I don't think so.
I think that was the 200-watt version.
Okay, so
once
those
they got to the 200.
Yeah,
So
we got to talk about that one.
So the KT66 is the big powered output tubes.
Output.
Thank you.
I'll stand
Thank you.
corrected.
Thank you.
And this is so both the original JTM 45 and the Blues Breakers were reissued in 1989.
Yeah.
Now, here's the big caveat.
Yeah.
The original Blues Breaker cabinet depth is 12 inches. The reissue is 9 inches.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Really?
And the originals were 12 inches deep to accommodate the larger tubes. And there is a tonal difference, as I'm told, between those two versions, and mainly because of the size, the depth of the cabinet. So I guess the lesson to be learned here. I mean, I don't know if they were doing a true.
What you mean?
Reissue.
Why did they not?
I mean, I know why they did it because they didn't have KT66s to put in there. They were working with 6L6s, so they said, well, why would we make it this big? Let's just drop it down 3 inches.
Well, now here's something too. I don't know about the Blues Breaker reissue, but the JTM 45 reissue, depending on when you got it, they came stock with 5881s at one point, and then they switched to 6L6, and so I've had them come in the shop with all different kinds of, well, and it's the same circuit though.
Right.
They just, so I don't know if they were doing that, if it was even a thought out process at that point.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Now, Rob, you mentioned to me that there was a 100-watt variant of the JTM 45.
And this is a weird one, and I can't remember. It was a bass player that actually asked for it originally, but it was a JTM 45, and they wanted a louder JTM 45 for a bass instrument, and it's called the JTM 45/100. And I've never seen one. I probably never will see one in my life. They probably made like 100 of them or less. But the neat thing about this was that it wasn't a 100-watt transformer mated with 4 KT66s, as we just assume, double the tubes. It had 4 KT66s, with 2 of the 45-watt transformers running in parallel.
Oh, wow.
So they literally didn't redesign anything. They just said, well, let's just put 2 transformers with 2 more tubes in here, wired up in parallel. There we go.
Wow.
And that's how they got. Yeah. So there's very, very few. But that's what, as I understand, was kind of the driving point to, I don't want to say phase out the JTM series or the 45s, but come up with the next thing
Right.
that we know is the super leads.
Right.
So,
Question. Do we think that there's any... So the Blues Breaker is maybe similar to the Vox AC30 in its form factor.
Yeah, you're right.
So do we have any history on... was it sort of like, hey, we got to compete with the Vox 30?
I think it was Eric. This might be wrong, but Eric Clapton needed a version to put in the back of his car, the boot of his car, I guess he called it. And so he designed the Blues Breaker so it could be like you could take it around, because I think right before then, Pete Townsend, after he did the 812, they designed these giant 812 stacks,
Right.
and then the roadies were upset about that.
That's one cabinet
Yeah.
with 8 12-inch
So then-
speakers, the size of a refrigerator.
That's amazing.
So then Jim Marshall cut it in half, but then Eric Clapton said, "Hey, can I get one of these that I can put in my car
we can make it
myself?"
more
You know, like- so I think that might be why that happened. Although there were other 212s, the Vox AC30, so it made sense to do that for sure.
Yeah, and Vox would have been really their competition because, as I understand, Vox was very close in proximity even
Right.
to where Marshall
Okay.
was operating. So
Okay, cool. I'm just wondering. It's like,
Yeah.
seems like, what's
Yeah,
the guy
so-
across the street doing?
So-
we need to do some of that.
Obviously, the most famous player, I guess, would be Clapton with the Blues Breaker.
Yeah.
And that was, that contribution to that sound.
Okay.
So, now where does this go? So we start off.
Wait,
with
does that have anything to do with the actual band, the Blues Breaker? Like the blues?
It wasn't called a Blues Breaker. It was called a JTM 45 combo. But then John May on the Blues Breakers,
Yeah.
Clapton played on
Right,
that, and
yeah.
then
That's
they
where the
started
name
calling
came
it the
from.
Blues Breaker.
Yeah,
Look at me coming in with the knowledge.
yeah.
I have some.
and to
That's
that
a
point,
good
talking
guess,
about the
Todd.
nomenclature of Marshall stuff, they had a model number. I don't remember. It was like 4522 was the 212, 4510 or something was the 410 model. So they didn't have names for them like Blues Breaker. Marshall from the beginning of this was just they would give it numbers that made sense to them.
Yeah.
and to
It's-
no one else.
Yeah.
To some degree, as we're going to find out from the next 10 years, these
Rob,
model
I
numbers
love your
make no
technical
sense.
stuff, but I think to some it probably sounds like when Homer Simpson snores. When we're
know what
doing
that
the
means.
math stuff. But
Oh yeah.
I love it though. We need that stuff on this channel,
right.
man. Okay.
So anyways, we interrupted Tony again.
No problem. So that leads us. We jump from the JTM series to new 50 and 100 watt. I guess plexis, right?
1966, 1981.
So talk about plexis. Everybody thinks of a plexi as being, well, no, I wouldn't say everybody. Usually when somebody says plexi, they think of the model, the 100-watt super lead, which is model number 1959. It's the 4-input guitar 100-watt model. They actually started using plexi panels in 65 before the 100-watt super lead ever existed.
And that's just to describe what this is. It's clear plexiglass that is silk screened with the controls and the
On the
name and the stuff
on the panel,
on
yeah.
the back side of the panel, and then it's shot with clear lacquer on the backside, so it gives it kind of a dimensional look.
yeah,
Yeah.
baby.
So and actually when they started making the 50 and 100 watts, I can only what's the word I'm looking for? Extrapolate that they were trying to streamline things a little bit. The 50 watts, they switched to EL34 output tubes and for both 50 and 100 watts, and they made a 50-watt transformer or a 100-watt transformer. So no mating two 50-watt transformers together.
Okay.
So you'd have a 50-watt, 100-watt, 2 tubes or 4 tubes, and they made that in the lead series, which was just a lead 50, or a super lead was the 100-watt.
Right.
And the bass was a 50-watt, and the super bass was a 100-watt.
So that's where the super lead comes in. It's not necessarily playing style or more gain and all that stuff.
It was meant, or marketed for guitar.
More.
lead
Super
guitar,
means more.
And super would be the 100-watt version.
In the
of it.
Yes.
50 watts were in the small box still.
Right.
And 100 watts were in the big box with the vent on top.
Right. and
Back then?
Yep.
Interesting.
So
See, I didn't
bigger.
know that.
Small box. So small box
Better.
up through 71, I think.
Yeah.
Really? So all the 50 watts, even the bass ones, were
Small box.
Small box.
yeah.
Interesting.
And
cool.
they're sweet because they're nice and small, and
Yeah.
they're really cool.
That's neat.
Very cool.
I do have a question on this. So, one of the most common things that we talk about amongst our friends and other players and stuff is if you say JTM 45 versus a Plexi, and then even versus the the JCM. Okay, the JTM, the Plexi, and the JCM. And maybe that's because we have the options in different modeling type gear, right? So you're like, oh, you're going to go for this sound, or this sound. Briefly, let's describe what the sound perception is between those ones. Anyway, you're going to give me a caveat. Go ahead.
Hold on, exactly.
Hold on, Jared.
Let me do a caveat. Because everybody assumes Plexi, or not everybody assumes, Plexi means the 100-watt super lead, right?
Let's go for that.
Right, and that's going to be that model where a Plexi
Sure.
actually is like 10 different models.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. You
Yeah,
know.
that's fair.
Go, guys.
So I would say, real quick, Plexi is any amp, 50 or 100, before, although he's correct, it's a little more of a caveat, like when someone thinks of a Plexi, but any amp, a true Plexi is up through halfway through 69 when they went to metal panel. But they have the 4-hole inputs. They're the non-master volume models. People call Plexis like a 73. It's still the non-master volume. It's got the metal panel. People will call those Plexis also, because Plexi is basically just the non-master volume Marshall heads up until 75 to 77 when they started putting master volumes on. People will say that's a Plexi, like a 72 head. They'll call it a Plexi, even though it's not.
It's not a Plexi. Now isn't the real term Plexi, like if someone says, I've had a Plexi Marshall, and they actually are in the know, it's actually like 66 through 68, because didn't they changed the transformer somewhere around there, right?
69, I have two 69s that have Plexi panels. So halfway through 69, it's a Plexi. It's definitely a Plexi.
But I think even the late Plexis, they actually had different transformers than the earlier Plexis, which makes it a different
They
thing,
changed
isn't
some transformers, but it might even just be some circuit changes from like the negative feedback resistors or the bright caps on the V1. Some different, or like the shared cathode versus the split cathode. I don't want to go crazy with that.
Yeah.
But
We just lost Todd.
So here's the thing: it's if you have a Plexi panel up through halfway through 69, it's a Plexi. It doesn't matter what it is. It's a Plexi.
So let's just talk about, again, in general terms, if someone says blank, it sounds like this, blank, it sounds like this, blank, it sounds like this.
Okay. So
Okay.
if you want a description of like a stereotypical 45 versus
and I'm gonna prompt this because on the origin, there's a knob called tilt. Okay.
Yeah.
And that tilt is supposed to kind of give you want it to sound a little bit more like a JTM 45, or do you want it to sound a little bit more like you're making me dizzy nodding your head. I'm just saying what the brochure says, man.
It's marketing BS.
Okay, but that being said, it's coming from somewhere. Okay, so is there a warmer versus maybe a brighter, more articulate, or like what's going on?
The late 60s Plexis were warmer. People were using treble boosters a lot. They were warmer. They started moving towards a brighter sound by the end of 69, and into the metal panels, they started getting a little brighter, a little more aggressive, a little nastier.
Yeah.
And then 74, my 74 is definitely gnarlier.
Okay.
It's like the Sex Pistols versus like Cream.
Right.
You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
That's what I'm looking for.
So
technician, get a drink of water right now.
Well, okay.
but like Jimmy Page, song remains the same. Those were Plexi Marshalls, 68s, super basses, 69s,
Right.
and I think he even had KT88s in some
Now
of
the
those.
super bass though will be quite a bit mellower.
Yeah, but they can be aggressive. You turn them on
By
9 or
mellow,
10.
you mean aggressive.
Well, and what I mean is
Yeah.
if we would take a 68 super lead and a 68 super bass, the super bass is going to sound
Okay.
more mellow.
Okay.
Rob,
Yeah, for sure. for sure.
For the kids, for the people out there that are driving along that are like, look, I've had a Fender all my life, and I would like, maybe I've been interested in a Marshall, but what kind of sound do I want from that Marshall? Do I want to sound like like any modern metal thing? Do I want it to sound like, a 70s punk rock? Do I want it to sound like Led Zeppelin? Do I want it to sound like I'm still driving. I'm doing the driving motion.
You're
like
doing
Eric
very
Clapton.
nice.
So my question
Driving
is,
for hours
from the non-technician, what is your perception of these?
Yeah.
Of these?
So like high voltage AC/DC. It's basically super leads left and right, and then Angus playing a JTM 45 for the leads. You'll hear it's a darker sound, especially with that SG. It's a little bit darker, it's rounder, it's warmer, but they break up very musically. It's very smooth.
Okay.
Same thing with the Allman Brothers. Dwayne's playing a 50-watt bass, Dickie's playing a 100-watt super lead. So you can hear it's a little clearer, a little bit more, a little more, I would say, girth to some extent. And then Dwayne's got the
more
bass head.
girth?
The super lead's got a little bit more like low end punch.
Because
It's just because it's got the bigger transformer. It's
$100
pushing a little more.
versus the.
Okay.
His bass head, it's going to be a little more sustainy, a little warmer. Sex Pistols are going to be 70s Marshalls, nasty, but they're still non-master volumes. They're not getting into the JCM or even like the later AC/DC records. They started because they were just kind of going with the newer stuff. Sometimes they're back to the old stuff, but they even used some master volumes on Let There Be Rock. It's definitely, those are great heads, those master volume late 70s Marshalls. Priest used the non-master heads with treble boosters. So they were running into the darker amps, but they were running treble boosters to get the gain out of them, get them to sound brighter. So all those types, like even Billy Gibbons on ZZ Top's first record, super lead with a Les Paul. And you can just hear it's a very smooth sounding, nice breakup. It's not as nasty. They started getting nastier and nastier until they got to the JCM 800s, which is like, even Slash is noted to have used a plexi super trem. But then he ended up going to, I think he did with great results, that live at the Ritz, you can see that. He's using a JCM 800, the 2210, the channel switching. And I think it sounds exactly like Appetite. But apparently on Appetite, he was using a modded, like an extra gain stage in like one of those, I can't remember what those, SIT technology, one of those places you rent amps from. He ended up renting, SIR. So he ended up renting a.
I was going to say that. You just took the words out of my mouth.
So, start getting into that, like, obviously, like, Zach Wiles using a JCM 800. Randy Rhoads was using JMPs. I think they were late 70s, but non-master heads. Mm-hmm. So, I think
let's talk about that, because we shift over in this category from originally JTMs. And around 67
is when Terry leaves, and
they become JMPs, which stands for Jim Marshall Products. And
can I break in real quick?
Yeah.
I noticed in the notes that in the 50 watts. Hey everybody! As a reminder, this was episode 1 of 2 for Marshall 101. So be on the lookout for episode number 2 of Marshall 101 dropping real soon. Thanks.
Well, that's it for these knobs. Please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/theguitarknobs. Visit our website at theguitarknobs.com for all of our past episodes, 4 on the Floor blog, and other good stuff. You can connect with us on social too at our Facebook page and share your gear and stories on our Facebook group. Also, be sure to check out our Instagram at Guitar Knobs. Catch you next time.